Free music. All right, YouTube. We are live. This is the Tradstream number 3. Yes, I did change it from the Tradcast out of deference to Novus Ordo Watch. Have been out of the loop on this, or haven't been doing this for a while due to some life changes and a near constant battle with illness the last couple of months. I have a special guest with us. He is the proprietor of the YouTube channel, The Wandering Soul. We'll get to him in a moment. But first, I have a couple brief announcements. For those of you who are, just watching, hopefully joining us live, I will be doing first is I was going to do a mailbag video to show some of the interesting things people have sent me to my snail mail terrestrial mailbox. I'll probably do that next Saturday. For those of you who did any kind of donation to the channel, I'll keep that private. I won't share that. But some of the kind of cool stuff people sent, I was going to show that off. So watch for that next weekend. Number 2, I'll be doing a patron-only live stream that will probably be next Saturday, probably at this time. That'll be available through Patreon and Subscribestar. Those of you who have done donations to me in the past, email me. I'll make sure you can participate if you like. The third is I'm going to be doing a contest where I'll give a book away. I'm not sure what the book is yet. It'll be something traditional and uplifting, or at least help you with your for your faith journey, so to speak, to borrow the phrase of the new church. And the contest will be to redesign the image I use on my channel. This swanky Blues Brother looking version of Hilaire Belloc. I'll put up on the blog some baseline images. It's still going to be Belloc. It's not. Some people have told me to use images of Our Lord or Our Lady. No, that's going to be a non-starter. No, but I'll put up some images and go ahead and if you want to participate, redesign the image.
Hey.
Keep it with the sunglasses and all that, with the general sort of branding and theme of what I do. And the winner will get a copy of a book of my choosing. I'm not sure what it'll be yet, but it'll be something you'll want that'll help you with understanding the traditional faith. So with that, we'll bring on our guest. He's the host of The Wandering Soul. What name do you want to go by? Because I'm not going to call you that during the when we're conversing here.
Damien.
All right.
Peterson is where you can follow me on Twitter at, so we can go by Damien. That'll work. I do have a suggestion for the book giveaway. It could be Building a Bridge by Jimmy Martin. That could be that could be the giveaway book.
If I was wanting to give away Kindling, that would be the book giveaway. I'd only want to find a copy of that at a used bookstore.
Right? Yeah, you don't want any money getting to him. It might be used
or black comedy, as it were. So let's see here. Our topic today is going to be the what is the sort of what do the modernists want, and what will they be do? What will the church look like in 100 years if nothing changes? So this is meant to be kind of a lighthearted thing, but based in reality at the same time. So I don't know. What do you think? What do you think the 100 years from now? What will the modernists be doing, given that they hold regular synods every year or every 2 years, and then extraordinary special synods every few months? It seems like.
Well, they've already, there's been leaks already on what they're trying to do, like with the Amazon Synod. They want to attack clerical celibacy. They want to completely get rid of that. So the whole idea of the priests and the bishops being kind of separate, being like a separate class that was specifically designated by God with a separate gift, a separate charism, that's going to be completely done away with. Then, of course, there's the women diaconate, which, that's coming. I don't know how soon, but I believe that will be coming. And then how much does that trickle up? Will we see women priests? I don't know. Because I also have this, this dichotomy playing in my mind. If the modernists go unabated, then yes, we're going to see some very bad things. But I also feel like there might be a bit of a turnaround. But if we just kind of play it out, if the modernists aren't stopped at all, I think that we will see women priests. And I think that we will see a further rupturing of the church, much, much bigger than what Marcel Lefebvre did. We will see more mainstream bishops in the future separating. So it's going to get ugly, I think.
Mm-hmm. I would expect that if we follow the logic that has come since the 70s of first girl altar boys, and then the women reading the word at the altar, not the gospel, but well, if you get women in the diaconate, that will change, because what does a deacon do? Because they're not looking, when they're talking about women in the diaconate, they are not talking about the ancient deaconesses who basically who were essentially helpers of the bishop, who just helped baptize women and helped with domestic violence cases. No, they're looking at equality, the value of the revolution, equality, equality, equality. Well, that would mean reading the gospel at the mass and doing the external blessings like the permanent deacons in the Novus Ordo do. So you would get that. So let's follow this logic. You'll get women priests. Well, what happened in the Anglican Church once they got women priests?
What's still happening to the Anglican Church? And, and this isn't, how do I frame this in a way that's not going to make people too angry? Like, this isn't a total diss against women, but like, men and women are clearly different. And men are more stringent on, we understand that there are certain biological rules, and we understand there are certain truths that ought not change. We kind of go at things with the understanding of more concrete values, whereas women kind of approach things from a more compassionate perspective. And so whenever women get into authority positions in the church, in any kind of a church, like the Anglican Church or, a Reformed church, you always see a complete and total liberalizing of that church. The rainbow flags go up within 5 years after you allow women into authority positions, because they have compassion instead of a respect for truth. So that's just going to completely blow the door open for, what will eventually come as well.
Well, yeah, like women bishops in the Anglican Church, and beyond. Like, I've joked before that one day we will have a female Holy Father, a popette.
A popette, yeah. A little pink tiara or something.
Well, of course. I did put a link to his channel, to the Wandering Souls channel, in the where the comments would be. I pinned it. I don't know if it'll show up during the live stream. If not, if you're listening to this on a rebroadcast, it'll be easy to find. But that's just the liturgy. Remember, they're also pushing for acceptance of the Skittles lifestyle, so to speak. Well as married priests. I mean, let's do some math here.
Yes,
because you've had bishops. You just had the Pope say, talk positively about civil unions, when no one in history, prior to about 5 years ago, that would have been a non-starter in the church. So,
yes, and really, just quickly, this whole ideology of the Skittles, it is all usually based on one thing, and this is their main argument, and this is really Jimmy Martin's argument. Well, your son is gay, or your brother is gay, and they're good people, right? Okay, well then therefore, all gay people are good people. But it's not because they're gay that they're good people. They're good people in spite of the fact they're gay. They're good people because they're helpful to other people, they're compassionate to other people. It has nothing to do with who they have sex with. And this is how it's being pushed on us. And so it's just this very mixed up ideology. And yes, they're just continually pushing it based on this. Oh, well, we can't turn these people away. We must have compassion on them. But compassion without actual truth and without actually telling them that, look, this is a lifestyle that, will ultimately lead you to hell, then there is no actual compassion. But of course, the problem is that our hierarchy does not believe that. They don't believe in, I don't think most of them believe in hell at all, to be honest.
Well, there's actually one thing they don't believe in that I'm actually thankful that they don't believe in. And that's, they don't believe in infallibility, magisterial or papal infallibility. This is as heresies go. This works in our favor because believing in these things means that they believe in something being permanent. Because when something is declared infallibly, that's a permanent decision, and the revolution is constant. The revolution must continue and go forward at all times. You can't do that with permanency. So, in a weird way, it's not surprising that since 1954, there hasn't been an infallible declaration from a pope, even though there have been infallible declarations of the pope going back all the way to the first century, even if the dogma itself wasn't formally defined until 1870 or something. So it's not something that just got made up out of thin air, papal infallibility. I saw in the chat. I saw in a chat somebody asked if women are ordained. Doesn't that mean the church isn't the true church? And the answer to that is no. Heretics have, to borrow a phrase that's making the rounds right now, infiltrated the church. They did it a long time ago. And just because bad guys took the church over does not mean that that the church isn't the church that God founded. And if anything, the fact that the Catholic Church is always the church targeted by heretics, by modernists, by the people who want to wipe us all out, it's always the first church targeted. That actually is an endorsement. I think it was Fulton Sheen said, if I was looking for the true church, I would look for the one the world hates the most. And you're in that church if you're Catholic.
Well, and remember during the Arian crisis, it was Athanasius who said, at the time, most of the hierarchy was actually on the side of the Arians. And not Arius, but Athanasius said, to one of the bishops said, you may have the churches, the buildings, but we still have the faith. So yes, right now, like it looks pretty bad. And yes, there will probably be some very bad things happening in the future, but it doesn't mean the church is defective or has defected. It just means that we're going through a very, very trying time, and we're still trying to figure out exactly how we deal with it. And
I'm trying to wrap my head around the fact that, deep in the squishiest parts of Pastor Jimmy Martin's heart, he would love to see gay married clergy.
Yes.
All you have to do is look at his advocacy for the same-sex attracted, shall we say, and and this push for married priests, and you see that is something that these guys want. But at the same time, I don't think they're going to be successful. But for a little thought experiment, what would it look like? What it would look like if you haven't seen Michael Matt's Remnant Underground videos.
I have.
You should. Where he's living in the basement, where he's he's got the wall of skulls behind him. There's a reason that magazine in his channel is called The Remnant. It's because
because there's only a few of us left.
Right. And that's what you're really looking at if this stuff keeps going forward, because modernism is a heresy. And when I was thinking about this in the last couple of days, as we were getting ready to do this, the modernist program is like the Chinese Revolution after 1947. Are you familiar with what they did there?
Vaguely, yeah.
It was a cultural revolution, and they had 5-year plans, and it was an ongoing revolution. It never ended until the Chinese government wiped out a rather significant portion of their own population and realized that what they were on was a path to ruin, and instead chose some other form of tyranny to impose on their people, some other variation of communism that at least didn't result in, mass starvation and other madness. And that's kind of has been going on in the church, at least the last few years, and actually longer with the so-called synodal church. Because when you have a totally extraordinary synod, extraordinary meaning, hey, this is a special occasion, but they do them at least once a year, right? Almost like clockwork. And then they do their regular every other year synod. This is a revolutionary meeting meant to be doing the work of a council. These synods are the Third Vatican Council by proxy.
Yes, and that is just the complete opposite of what the Catholic Church is. I remember hearing not long ago when all of this crap was coming out with the Pope changing various things. I heard Rush Limbaugh, who's not a Catholic and it doesn't really weigh much often into religious politics, but he said, I don't know what's going on with this Pope, but isn't the whole purpose of the Catholic Church to preserve tradition, not change it? So it's even coming from, someone like Limbaugh, but that is it. These ideas of a constantly changing and synodal church is completely antithetical to what the church actually is supposed to be. Like a Pope is not supposed to have a meaning or what is the word I'm looking for? Like each Pope has his own flavor or whatever to his pontificate. That's not supposed to be the case.
We should be living in a world where all we really do when it comes to thinking about the Pope is praying for his intentions and listening to whatever message he might issue for the bishops and priests to read at the Mass.
That's exactly
the world we should live in. You and I shouldn't care about encyclicals. Most of the time we shouldn't care about encyclicals, but there has been an increasing tendency in the modern media age for encyclicals to get read by the average person, which is why Laudato Si is the size of a small book.
Yeah.
And, I mean, some of these encyclicals I read for Saturdays take about 6 minutes to record because they are really short. Like Leo the 13th, the last Leo the 13th encyclical I did on the Rosary, I think was under 10 minutes long because it was short, punchy, to the point. You know, these are, in the modern media age, though, these are meant for mass consumption, and it's crazy. And honestly, I think part of the reason that the modernist heresy is doing as well as it is because of mass media. But at the same time, the internet is enabling people to connect to sort of resist these things, or at least to work out, to work on their salvation away from the modernists if they decide that they need to, go the sedevacantist route or the next best thing.
Right, and that's why I'm not completely that pessimistic, at least as much as I was maybe a year ago, because and I'm not trying to like necessarily celebrate that people aren't having children, but like those in the Novus Ordo only churches, and I mean people that are just in the more mainstream Catholic churches, not traditional Catholics, they're not having kids. They're just not.
The worst offenders aren't. Because let's remember, there are plenty of good Catholics.
Absolutely.
In those parishes, and they don't have a way out. I see them in the comments all the time.
And and I'm not trying. I'm not trying to loop them all together. I'm just saying, like the
contraceptive mentality.
Yes,
runs rampant.
Right, and most of those people going to the churches, they just go there with good intentions, and they're just being lied to by their pastors, and so it's not their fault. And I think that what the bishops of the world, and the Pope included in this, is forgetting is that this contraceptive mentality is going to end up leading to the traditionalists taking the church back from the modernists, because our birth rate is actually, I believe it is double, as if I recall correctly, from those in the more mainstream churches.
It's gonna take, if it does happen that way, it is gonna take longer than we think.
It will.
But
it took about 100 years for modernism to completely take over too.
Yeah, this is true. So, which means some of us may see it in our lifetimes. We may be old codgers when we're there.
I hope so. Yeah, it'd be nice.
I would love. I do hope to live to see the arrival of the Catholic monarch and the angelic Pope who who restores order in a post-chastisement world. But I don't know if I want to live through the chastisement. You know what I mean?
Yeah, firing entire faculties of college professors, putting Jimmy Martin in like some type of a pontifical prison or something. That would be perfect. I would love to see that.
There's a story. I think it's from Pius X, where he called a bishop. I don't even know where this bishop was from, who had not been listening to directives coming from him, who was refusing to I think the oath against modernism and other such things. And so the bishop shows up in Rome and kneels before the Pope, and the Pope doesn't say anything to him. And then he reaches over, takes off his bishop's hat, and dismisses him as father, whatever his name was. He literally just downgraded him on the spot. And I'm just like, I want a based Pope like that. I really do. But the best we're going to get in the coming years is a Pope elected out of panic, because a lot of the bishops and cardinals realize that the governments of the world are going to be investigating them, and so they need a Pope they would elect a Pope who will at least go along with the investigations out of a sort of a sense of damage control, and that'll be a better Pope than we've probably had in a while. But it'll still probably be a Pope with modernist tendencies.
That's
probably where we're at, and that's also
I don't see us getting a good Pope for the next 2 or 3 tries, but.
And
then again,
that might not be our lifetime either. That might not even be in our lifetime either.
Yeah,
because Benedict reigned for 8 years. John Paul II reigned for 27.
Yeah.
So
if we get a young Francis, that would be that'd be quite bad. But but again, we don't really know what will happen. Like with what just happened in the EU with the various elections. Like there were some elections that really shocked me, that I did not expect such good news coming out of Europe. And even in France, so we never know what might happen. Who knows? Maybe the next Pope will be Cardinal Sarah or Burke. I mean, of course it's not likely, but we just never know what might happen. I think we'll probably get 1 or 2 more bad popes, but maybe we will get blessed in the future. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, there's people who talk about what's called the Salvini option. You familiar with the Salvini option?
No, I want to hear it though.
The Salvini option is essentially Matteo Salvini denying visa entry for any prelate of the church who's being investigated for covering up sex abuse crimes, and it happens, and he denies entry into Rome and Roman airspace and entry into the country into Italy in general during a conclave. Now think about
that's everyone, ain't it?
That would be most of the American card. That'd be at least all the famous ones, the ones that we name like Supich and soon to be Gregory and Tobin and all. Can you imagine the Camerlengo not being able to do his job because he made the mistake of visiting the US when the Pope drops dead, basically?
Oh yeah, I forgot about Farrell. I forgot that he's the Camerlengo. Yeah,
of course he was.
Yeah.
Hey, Marcel Maciel's personal driver is not the Camerlengo.
Yeah, the roommate of McCarrick. Who knows what was going on in their residence. I mean, that's just.
Let's not think about that.
I know
that could be the near occasion of sin. So
yeah. But no, I remember hearing a story that Salvini was wearing a T-shirt that said "Benedict is my Pope." I laughed when I saw that. He's not the fan of Francis, and nor is Francis the friend of Salvini, which is strange. That it's not strange, but Pope doesn't have any problem meeting with actual dictators who actually persecute Christians, put them in prison and whatnot. But
the weird. I mean, it's the reaction to Salvini from the Pope is fascinating to me because say what you want about his politics, put it aside for a second. You have a leader of a country, or he's kind of co-leader because of the situation there, who just had his country consecrated the Immaculate Heart of Mary by proclamation in the same way one of the kings of France did, just before he got his head cut off. And the Vatican's reaction was anger. Wait a second. Shouldn't you be happy that somebody just entrusted Italy to, Our Lady's Immaculate Heart? I wouldn't care what leader did it if it was, something, that they did intentionally and honestly, they actually wanted this done and actually believed in it instead of, but some people will say, well, it was just a political thing. Yeah, maybe, but if it was done properly, don't care. The end, it will bear good fruit.
Yeah, and I think I saw a tweet from Regina Caeli, I believe it was, and they said that
I'm blocked by them on Twitter.
Oh, are you?
I responded to some tweet of theirs in a way they block a lot of people often for no good reason.
Oh, I don't know. I just have them on my feed, and I saw that they said something about Francis and somebody else dedicated the month of May to Ramadan, and it was Salvini and who's that? Bolsonaro dedicated the month of May to Mary. So just kind of who's really doing the work of God here. But.
So we have 1 week left of Ramadan Bombathon. So
I know.
Keep ahead. There's a website out there keeping track of all the bad things going on during it because the violence always skyrockets during Ramadan. Which, by the way, is why you're probably seeing a lot of the things going on in Africa with a lot of the violence. It's because of what time of the year it is. People are gonna be like, "How can you dare say that?" I'm like, because it happens every year during Ramadan.
It's just like us Catholics during the Christmas season and the Eastertide. We just start bombing people too,
Well, I don't know about you, but I love renting a sleigh with a bunch of deer and just
we're gonna put missiles on the antlers and just terrorize neighborhoods.
Yeah, that's how we do, right? So, aside from the possibility of following the logic of normalizing the sexual deviancy and pushing for married clergy and such, what else do you think would be the end game? Because we just went through the obvious things, but there's a lot of the liturgical abuses and theological changes they're pushing for that actually would be even the most terrifying because if you want to really do the best for your own to start to weather the storm of these changes, just learn the traditional faith and live it as best you can, just despite what some of the nonsense coming from the pulpit you hear these days. But these guys are trying to change a lot of that. We saw that with the death penalty is the most obvious case.
Yeah. And it kind of as an aside to that, I'm a convert and I know you are as well. When I came into the faith, I studied a lot about the church. I first of all became interested in the church by an accident by studying history. But long story short, I read the Catechism, of John Paul II. I didn't know anything about like the internal battles of the church at that time, and I read it from cover to cover, and I remember what it said about the death penalty. And so it's just a shock to me now when it's just been completely changed. So even though it was kind of soft on the death penalty even then, it's just the fact that now it's just wrong. It's just, it baffles me. We have to unlearn our faith.
That's because, according to Francis, it's the current year, and we understand things better now than we did before, which is a totally shocking statement because of the implication that, saintly popes who have said some very hardline things about the death penalty.
Yeah.
We now know better because it's the current year. And I think it was Pius V wrote a papal bull saying that priests who have the sexual proclivities that we're dealing with among our clergy today are to be stripped of all their faculties and handed over to the local authorities for punishment for the punishment that they that is legal, which at the time was death. So, which I'm not suggesting we necessarily,
maybe that's what they fear. They don't want it to go back to that. They're in panic.
Society's not going to flip that. The pendulum.
Maybe they're afraid of the slippery slope.
The pendulum swing, the socio-political pendulum swing that's coming, that we're seeing happen right now, isn't going to swing so far to that direction that we're, executing people because of their sexual orientation or whatever. We're not going to see that, and we're not advocating that. Just for the record. But that's not my whole point. Bringing that up is, you have that kind of a statement by a pope, and now we know better because it's the current year.
Yeah, because Pope France, he knows better. I mean, he's such a moral guy, as we see with how he's handled sex abuse.
Which is like why it's always been understood that like what we said earlier, we're not supposed to care that much about what a pope says because he's just teaching the same stuff that his predecessors did. If there's really an important message, we'll hear it from him. We'll hear it at the pulpit on a Sunday. And that's it. Otherwise, pray for his intentions, which you can find out what they are by going to your local parish. That's how it should be under normal circumstances. But we live in a revolutionary period in the church right now,
where things are trying to be, just absolutely hardline changed. And like with regards to like what else do we think is coming? I think you touched on it. The liturgy. We're not. As bad as the liturgy has gotten, I have no illusions that it's about to get worse in the future. I don't know how much worse. I don't know that it's going to be like a whole brand new mass. I think it's going to be subtle, slow changes to more of even a more Protestantized version of our Novus Ordo Mass. And then I also think that eventually they're going to really go hard after Summorum Pontificum. That's my theory.
That's my suspicion too. You see evidence of that in Italy, both with them just wholesale ignoring Summorum Pontificum, but they've just issued a new missal in Italy with the new and improved Our Father.
I didn't see that. Is that?
I just saw that today.
Is that the Francis version where it says?
Yeah, that's the Francis version.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's coming. So.
There's nothing that can't be changed. And now, like, for instance, like, I'm not one of those people that think that if you go to a Novus Ordo Mass that you're excommunicated, it's evil, it's illicit. I don't believe all of that. I do, however, I have my concerns. Like, someone that, has children and they want their children to grow up and become Catholic and say the only churches around them are all very bad Novus Ordo Masses, you have a legitimate fear of your child becoming Protestant and, completely losing the faith. And so these are just really tough times because, like, what do you do in a situation like that? Because as Catholics, yes, we have to fulfill our Sunday obligation, but at the same time, we are not required to force our children or ourselves to, lose the faith. So it's just, I don't know how to balance all of this, what's going on.
Which is why I tell people to learn what was taught, what the faith taught 100 years ago, 500 years ago. Yes, there's been an organic development of doctrine, but the faith was the same. Learn what that was, because, if you had told people 100 years ago that there would be people pushing for communion for the civilly divorced and civilly remarried, that people would be pushing to let Protestants receive Holy Communion,
Yeah.
they would have thought you were insane 100
Yeah.
years ago. So, unless, of course, you were one of the people who, had reason to pay attention to what Pius X was doing 100 years ago, then you, or I guess Benedict XIV, 15th, 100 years ago, you would have understood, because you would have understood modernism, and probably you would be starting to pray a rosary multiple times a day to forestall that from happening.
Right. And that's why Francis is kind of a good thing for like an accelerationist standpoint. Because I mean, we knew like eventually we were going to get a Francis type Pope.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, John Paul II, he was bad on a lot of levels, but at least his moral teachings were pretty solid. But like the slow boiling of the frog that has really happened, like when people like, Michael Matt and Michael Davies and, Marcel Lefebvre and a lot of these other people that were really early on, like sounding the alarms and saying, hey, the faith is being destroyed. It's being decimated. These are what they're planning to do in the future yet. Everyone's like, no, it's not that bad, because there were still a lot of good things happening in the church, the leaders. And now, all of these people are being vindicated. Now we even have, like Cardinal Burke, who just recently criticized the SSPX, saying they're in schism. Now he's just recently said in an interview, well, maybe this is about a year ago, he was asked, what will you do if the Pope moves to allow for divorced and remarried people to receive communion? He said, I will resist. I can do nothing else. So, I mean, it's more mainstream people are waking up. And I think Francis has really, been responsible for that. He's woken me up to this whole internal struggle of the church. I was not red-pilled on the church. I was always a traditional Catholic, but I didn't know that was a thing. I just thought that's what you were. I didn't know there was, for instance, such a thing as a pro-choice Catholic. I just thought you were just Catholic. You're traditional. That's right.
Nope. There is no such thing as a pro-choice Catholic.
Amen.
Or anything.
Yes, exactly.
What you've discovered is that there are Catholics, and then people who are in various different stages or different places on a spectrum of apostasy, either basically being in error, honest error, because they are never taught things from the pulpit, or they're willfully heretical, and they don't care that the church said, hey, you can't be a socialist. They're like, don't care. Hooray, hammer and sickle all the way. If you pay any attention to what goes on in social media, there are a whole group of a growing number of these Catholics who call themselves socialists. And I don't mean socialists like what Americans call socialism, because most of the stuff that Americans call socialism isn't socialism in the slightest. That's the stuff that the Reagan era people told you to make you afraid of the government having a food stamp program. Real socialism isn't Northern European stuff. Real socialism is hardline authoritarian. We're going to do all these things in the name of the people, and then they redistribute wealth from the people with property to themselves, not to the people, and now everyone is super poor. That's socialism. And the church has said you can't be a socialist. Doesn't matter what flavor of socialism you try, you can't be a socialist. And there are a whole bunch of group of Catholics calling themselves socialist and trying to say, well, we just made up a new version of socialism. It hasn't been condemned, and yeah, it has. It was condemned 100 years ago by it was condemned up until Benedict XVI. Every pope condemned it.
Yeah, even liberalism itself has been condemned. So many of these things have just been condemned, and it's just. But I mean, like, for instance, Francis is very pro-socialist, and it's just, what do we do with this? What do you do with the man who he's come out and he's basically he's forcing you to question your entire faith. Things that have been, quintessential Catholic beliefs ever since the church was founded by Christ, he is attempting to change. Like the divorced and remarried issue, that's direct, explicit words by Jesus himself. Whoever puts away his wife and marries another commits adultery. Like, you can't change. There is no alternative interpretation to that. There's no maturing interpretation of that. So, like, when you have a pope coming out and declaring that Jesus was wrong and not compassionate enough, because that's in essence what he's saying, we have to like really analyze and say, maybe we need to amp up our resistance here.
Yeah, I think people need to forget, or tend to forget, one thing though, which is the nature of what we're dealing with. This is a spiritual war.
Yeah.
And if you want to ramp up your resistance, this goes back to like the Fatima message. You know, when people like, I got home minutes before we logged on and had our pre-stream chat. And I was this morning, my wife and I drove the hour to go to the first Saturday Mass. At the Fatima message, everyone knows about the consecration of Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Our Lady.
Mm-hmm.
What most people tend to forget about that message is that she also asked for a devotion be kept to the 5 first Saturdays. And the 5 first Saturdays involve going to confession, going to a Mass of reparation, very specific kind of Mass, and receiving Holy Communion, receiving the Eucharist in a state of grace, and doing so for reparation for sins against the Immaculate Heart of Mary and sins against the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and going in an after Mass, meditating on the mysteries of the Rosary for 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. Doing that and then how often you're supposed to do, or how you do it after that is up to debate. But it's thought to be, you start on the first Saturday of the month and you do it for 5 consecutive first Saturdays. At least that's like the mainstream interpretation of it. And according to Sister Lucy, Our Lady wanted that to be the law of the church, and well, it's not. So,
right.
If you want to help in this spiritual war,
yes,
maybe take up the 5 first Saturdays devotion, pray a rosary every day. If you're already doing the praying your rosary every day, add a second if you can, even if you have to start by just adding an extra decade. That's where it begins.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. Like, by amping up our resistance, like, there are a few things, and it's first and foremost has to be won by God. And that's why, like, I try to advocate not for so much pessimism, even though, like, a lot of stuff we deal with is kind of negative. Unfortunately, just it is what it is. But I mean, like, even though, like, probably 80% of the hierarchy currently is either a modernist or, just apathetic, and so they're they're complicit because of that. We have on our side God, Our Lady, and these are actual realities. We actually have the faith that these people, Jesus, God, Mary, Our Lady, these are real things to us. And I think the hierarchy has lost the faith in that. And I think people like Pope Francis is really very arrogant in thinking that he can just completely change the Church of Christ, and forgets that Jesus himself is ultimately not going to allow that. And so that is where our resistance does lie, is in prayer. Prayer, and I would add in there, having as many children as you possibly can. Those two things, I think, are the quintessential elements of a true Catholic resistance.
Well, yes, and if you're concerned about the state of Western civilization, the European migrant crisis and and demographics and all of it, you can do your part by having more kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you're afraid of the financial cost, do you trust in God?
Yeah,
He'll help you out.
Yep.
It's one of the reasons that like this morning when I went to the 5 first Saturdays Mass, there was a fair amount of people there, not nearly as many as on a Sunday, unfortunately, but there were also quite a few kids, and most of the infants were in the cry room with their mothers.
Yeah.
And it was, more packed than you might expect, especially since this parish that we went to is in the middle of nowhere, like a lot of traditional parishes are.
Yeah.
Found out this morning that in the past they had tornadoes that were bearing down directly on the parish, and then swerved and moved out of the way to go a different direction. And this has happened multiple times like that in the parish's history. And so all I'm saying is this is a spiritual conflict. And yes, there are material components to it. So for instance, if you're listening to this today or Sunday, June 2nd before Mass, there might be a second collection, if you're in the United States, for the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, their communications campaign. This sounds like an innocuous thing, right? Let's help, we were raising money to help, with communications materials so people will give. Well, I found out that they've used this money in the past to suppress the Latin Mass in Africa.
Yeah.
Because in Africa, where you might have a small 20-mile geographic area where 100 languages are spoken, the Latin Mass thrives in a lot of those places. Why does it thrive? Because
it's a universal language.
It's a universal language that doesn't change. People come, and it actually helps to bring them together as one body. Well, they're suppressing that by bringing in, Novus Ordo priests who speak these local these local dialects and have the new mass in their language. And some people might be like, well, what's wrong with that? It's like, well, you are now helping to destroy a lot of the cohesion of those communities that have a long history of not liking each other much. So that's what the communications that's at least one of the things the communications campaign has been used for in the past. When you go to mass, just have that on the back of your mind when they pass that second collection basket around.
Yeah, and I'm more hard lined. I would say if you know for a fact that the collection is going to be something like the USCCB, I would just put in an envelope some Monopoly money and toss it in there. I mean, I'm all for it. Like we are required to support our parishes. Like we're required to do that, and like especially like traditional parishes, we've got to really support them. But the USCCB, not a chance. Not a chance.
I mean, who's founded the USCCB, right?
I think it was
Blaise Supich's spiritual grandfather. It was Bernardin, yeah.
Okay.
It's his spiritual grandfather.
What I thought it was. Yeah.
And if you look at Church Militant is doing their series right now of kind of doing the family tree of the Modernists, and Bernardin is one of the key pegs in that wheel because he just keeps showing up in their family tree.
Yeah, and I wonder if he isn't one of those communist plants, and it's unfortunate that we'll probably never know for sure, but like if Belladonna is correct that there were thousands of men who were planted into the church hierarchy, he would have been too young.
He would have been too young to be part of the first.
Okay.
But he would be of the age to be recruited by one of the recruits.
Okay.
My theory is that Spellman was one. That's just a theory, okay. Obviously, for anybody who might want to go after me for libel.
Yeah, I've kept hearing more and more about Spellman, and he's got a connection to Sheen. And I mean, nothing against Bishop Sheen. Obviously, Bishop Sheen was a big time crusader against communism.
They were sort of Spellman was his superior, and they were nemesis.
Yep. Yeah.
Which is an awful situation to be in.
Yeah. Yeah. Bishop Sheen, he was not a traditionalist. Bishop Sheen was very much in favor of the liturgical changes. But
that's up to dispute, actually.
Is it?
There is some stories going around that he wasn't wild about what was going on at the council. And then after the council, a lot of the bishops in the West decided to send some of the bishops who were holdouts to a special sort of camp to re-educate them. And Bishop Sheen was apparently one who had to go to time out in the super happy fun USCCB FEMA camp.
Okay, I just remembered the story about him saying that Jesus didn't celebrate the Mass in Latin and all that. But he was a great man. I still watch some of his programs. He's really one of the greats. He's actually probably one of the key reasons that I'm Catholic today, because I stumbled upon some of his cassette tapes in a library once, and I just started listening to him. And I was like, wow, this is really good stuff. And it was like a catechism that he was doing, and he talked about the structure of the church and the Pope and all. It's like,
there's a reason that about once a month I put an essay of his up on the channel. So
he's phenomenal. His writings, his books are just he was just an incredible man.
Fun fact about him. You know who wrote the intro to his first book?
No.
G.K. Chesterton.
Really?
Yeah.
What was his first book? Was it Life of Christ?
I don't know, but I can find out.
Okay. G.K. Chesterton. He was a character.
So what are you covering on your channel these days? Like, what was your latest video?
My latest video was about that interview that Francis did with the Mexican journalist El Zaraki, where I did 2 videos on it, actually. The first one was about his remarks on the whole McCarrick nonsense. But the last one I posted was about his remarks about gay people and how, we need to just understand that they're all people of God and they're children of God, rather. And, if we understand that, then everything would change. And just more of his pushing of this gay agenda down our throat. And he even said in that interview, which I don't know got picked up a lot yet. I'm assuming it'll get picked up by Church Militant. Maybe it did get picked up in the download. I'm not sure. But he said in that interview, when he was asked directly whether or not homosexuals could receive, active homosexuals could receive Holy Communion, he said that he could not refuse homosexuals Holy Communion. He said it would be irresponsible for him to deny anyone Holy Communion from far away. So it was just a really, really awful interview. But it was an honest one. So that was the last video I covered. Of course, I covered the vegan thing. So I've been hitting on the two topics lately, the gay agenda, and also been trying to attack this idea of that, as Catholics, that we have to erase our borders in order to be good Catholics. So those two things I've been hitting hard lately.
Yeah. So I found the essay here. It's from a book by Fulton Sheen, his first book, God and Intelligence in Modern Philosophy, by Fulton Sheen, published in July of 1925, which was 11 years before Chesterton died from, according to his good friend Hilaire Belloc, his great love of bacon and beer. So I love Chesterton. He's a kind of a hero of mine, but I'm not wild about his canonization process, for the simple fact that as a guy who struggles with his weight, and it doesn't appear on camera because of my weight, and yes, I'm going to try to lose it soon. Gluttony is a real thing. It is a real sin, and I don't know if he was a glutton or if he had a medical problems or whatever, but until that is resolved, they should probably at least hold up on the plus, I'm suspicious in general of any canonization process that doesn't involve a devil's advocate and at least 4 miracles. So,
yeah. Oh, well, didn't Pope Francis try getting Orson Welles canonized too?
I never heard that, but I was going to say Orson Welles, wasn't he an atheist? But
yeah, well, that's another thing. And I just started to listen to something on YouTube by an SSPX priest on the recent canonizations. And that's a whole nother bag of worms, because I don't know where to fall on that, because like you just mentioned it, the process for the canonizations they were changed by JP2, where there's no devil's advocate anymore. You only need 1 miracle, and even the miracles that are allowed now to be used as proof are really sketchy. So it's like, wow, can we really trust these new canonizations? I know it's kind of a side topic, but
I just think that you can't go wrong with saints that have a 50-year or more sort of devotion to them. So Padre Pio and before, those are all safe bets. That's not knocking Saints Jacinta and Francesco Fatima.
No,
not a knock. That's not a knock against them or anybody in particular. But I'm just like, for people who worry about this stuff, go Saint Therese of Lisieux, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm talking about Paul VI and John the 23rd and all that. Yeah, that's where it gets. I'm like, I don't know about this one.
I just point out to people that they were all canonized by Pope Francis.
Yeah, I guess so. I have to say, mic drop. So
I'm just like, until the church rules otherwise, I'll accept it. But that doesn't mean you have to. You're not required also to pray for the intercession of any specific saint. There is no law of the church that tells you must pray for the intercession of these saints, except during the canon of the Mass, where you're supposed to be praying along with the priest as he is invoking the names of the saints during the consecration.
Right, and if you do happen to, maybe anyone listening, if you happen to take up praying for the intercession of, say, Paul VI, and you feel as though your house has become haunted or your daughter maybe is possessed, maybe please do contact us. We'd like to investigate that for maybe some counter evidence.
You want to redesign your house to look like a serpent? You want to redesign your house to look like a serpent's head? Right. I really want to know whose bright idea the Paul VI hall was, and who actually thought that was a good idea. I mean, yes, the photos out there of it are photoshopped to make it like more obvious what the design looks like. But I mean, come on, like, it still looks like a serpent's head. I've seen the aerial photo from above. It looks like a serpent's head. And then to top it off, the artwork they use these days at papal audiences, they look like something out of like a Del Toro horror movie or something. It's like, what are you guys doing? Like, I understand that people like modern art, but there is a point where it looks like the modern art looks like you bought it at a Halloween supply store, and you should probably reconsider what you're doing.
Yeah, and it's sad too. Like when I entered my First Catholic church. I was raised in a low church, and by that I mean they didn't have any kind of liturgy. It was just they do a sermon and they read a few Bible verses, they do a sermon, that's it. So when I walked to my first Catholic church, I was like, I'm all pumped up from reading about the Council of Trent and the Middle Ages and all this awesome historical stuff. I'm thinking I'm going to see like these huge, high ceilings with awesome marble and pillars and statues. I walk in, it's like 70s green carpet. There's like one statue by the front door and that's it. And I'm like, what is this? So yeah, modern art is just so depressing. It's just, I just don't see how, well, I guess I can see how. I'm looking at the Paul VI Hall right now, actually. I've never seen a picture, but I don't think it does look like a serpent's head.
Take a look at the aerial photograph from the picture photo of it from above. It's like they're not even being subtle. Sometimes I wonder like if the Our Lady crushing the head of the serpent isn't going to become like a literal true thing, like in that like a piece of like God's gonna drop a piece of real estate from orbit on the thing or something.
Yeah, like over at like the low alt or the fake IKEA altar in Notre Dame.
No, that's not the only one where that's not the only account we have of those of Notre Dame and other places where a church burned or there was an earthquake or something, and the new altar was the thing that was smashed by the roof or whatever, and the high altar was barely touched at all. Like that's not the only account of that. We have lots of accounts of that. It's almost like there's a neon sign being waved at us.
Yeah, it's so sad. I mean, I just what we lost, and I know we will get it back. But I go into some of these churches, and one of the things I like to do, like I'll when the weather's nice, like it's starting to get nice again now, I like to go to different towns and I'll plan a little mini vacation around an area where I'll go online and I'll say they have some really nice looking churches, and we'll go scope them out, find a a traditional mass, go to that, and then then go out to eat and a few things around that, and just some of these older churches are just so gorgeous, and then you see that this just disgusting looking, folding table or IKEA table or whatever. And you're just like, how could you do this?
I know. Like, let me give you an example. I live in central Oklahoma near the National Shrine of the Infant Jesus of Prague. It's located in Prague, Oklahoma. Spelled the same way as Prague, but
right.
And you go into this, it's a very modern building. And it has a side chapel where the actual shrine is. And it actually has kind of a very simple, old-fashioned, Latin Mass altar against a wall where, like, the only way you could celebrate the Mass there is ad orientem. That's the actual shrine, and then the parish church is attached to it. It's not a church in the round, to their credit, but it very much has a Cranmer table, and it's very it's quasi modern, and it's one of those like I don't even understand why you would bother. It's in a town that's not very big. You could probably have your Sunday masses in the actual chapel or the actual shrine. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I've never gone to mass there. One thing I recommend to people is look up to see what the Catholic history is of your state or your province, wherever you are, and go find a lot of the historic Catholic things in your area that you may not have visited, and go visit them. I discovered I'd always known about this mission, this Benedictine mission church that is out in the middle of a ghost town out where we live. And a couple of months ago, my wife and I spent the hour to drive out there through a lot of cellular dead zones, by the way. That's always a fun, nerve-wracking experience because you think you're going to have a multiple tire blowout at that time. And we went inside, and it's an active parish, and it had America magazine on the table once you walk in. But it had a beautiful but simple high altar. And remember, this was a frontier parish back in like the late 19th century, before Oklahoma became a state. But it also had a Cranmer table. And I always wonder, like, if you have that magnificent altar, why would you celebrate on the Cranmer table? Why would you do that?
Yeah, and you know why that all of that changed? It was an actual concerted effort undertaken by Paul VI. It was the idea that he didn't want it to be too flashy of a church anymore. He wanted it to reflect more of the church of the poor. so he didn't want these fancy churches anymore, which I didn't realize that it was like, this is like some effort by supposed St. Paul VI. And of course, the rest of the modernist bishops followed suit. But I mean, where was I going with that?
Well, it's I've always told, I told, I think it was Tradcat night. I told this. We had a conversation for his operation about a month ago, where I said that Pope Francis should have considered the name Paul VII, because honestly, when you read Paul VI, when you read of Paul VI's papacy, it sounds more like what we're going through now.
Paul VI is bad.
But the destruction of, I mean, when people talk about the Church of the Poor, Notre Dame was built by the poor.
Yes, it was.
People would donate 3 months of their labor to work on that thing. That's why it took a couple hundred years to build, besides the fact of, not having things like modern cranes and, bulldozers and things to build with. But it was built by the poor. Most churches are built by the poor. The church I came into the church in Portland, Oregon, is on the National Registry of Historic Places. It was built by the poor Italians in the city there. It was, most of the beautiful parishes you see were built by the labor and from the donations out of pure love for Christ and his church of the poor. And so stripping out the gifts of the poor to make a church of the poor is asinine.
It is. And that's exactly it. Because people say, and I've heard this argument from Protestants, like, oh, well, why spend, literally millions of dollars on, all this marble and statuary and stuff that Catholics, at least used to do? Well, it's because, you can tell how strong the faith of a certain community or city is based upon how beautiful their churches were. You would want your town church to be the most magnificent building in your town. You wouldn't want the courthouse to look better than your church. You wouldn't want, your mayor's house to look better than your church. You would want the church to have the nicest things inside, because the nicest things are supposed to be set apart for God. And that was the thinking that kind of went into churches, that, that's why we had the gold candlesticks. That's why we had the marble. That's why we had the statues, because the finest things were set apart for God, and no sacrifice was too great for that.
Yeah. And we've lost sight of that.
Yeah.
And which is why I think that the modern churches are actually almost a perfect monument to the attitude of the 60s and sort of the attitude of sort of secular modernism, with our obsession with consumerism and cheapness and everything else. Like, I was in a church that was sort of recently, our home parish was undergoing renovations, and a local Novus Ordo parish let the fraternity say their masses there. And so we would have a low mass on the Sunday about an hour and a half before the Novus Ordo mass was said. And this was a church built in the half round, right? So you had like stadium seating and then the Cranmer table and everything else. And it was a very surreal experience watching this priest celebrate a low mass in a complete with, on the scale of tacky of 1 being recognizably Catholic to 10 being Lutheran style felt banners with rainbows and things. This is a solid 5 on that tacky scale. So it wasn't even that bad, but it was a very strange place to be in. And,
go ahead.
And we were stuck there we were their guests, and we are grateful that we were able to have mass there, because it was really just a short drive from the home parish. But it makes you grateful when you come back to even a simple, traditionally designed parish, even though our parish was a building that we bought from, I think it was a group of like Oneness Pentecostals or something, and converted into a Catholic church. Like, apparently where the altar is now used to be a hot tub for baptisms. I'm not even joking about that.
I'm surprised. Well, luckily it didn't fall into the hands of the Jesuits, or that hot tub would still be there.
Yeah, no, the hot tub they would have moved it behind the rectory. Let's be real.
Yeah. But like, that's kind of the thing, like with a church, when you enter it, and that's why I always understood why Catholic churches were made to be so beautiful. When you enter it, and this is why I although I love Christian music, contemporary Christian music, I'm not a fan of it being, and keep in mind, I come from a Protestant background. Even then, I was not a fan of having it even in Protestant churches, much less so when I became Catholic. Because like when I enter a church, when my foot touches inside that door, I want to be completely disconnected from everything else that is in the outside world. I want the smells to be different. I want the sights to be different. I want the sounds to be different. And I want to have an experience that is going to draw me into God and away from the world. I don't want any connection with the outside world.
So I converted from essentially high functioning agnosticism. And I loved, I loved hard rock music and everything like that. And I had a real appreciation for, guitar driven music and such. Even in those days when I was converting, just found the idea of worship bands repulsive. I actually nearly puked once when I saw a mass being said with a hard rock band. Like there's a bishop or a priest celebrating a mass with these, guys dressed in black t-shirts and black pants playing power chords. And I'm sitting there going, this is probably the cringiest thing I've ever seen. That was before I saw the rapping priest. And that took the cake. That took the cake, but...
Yeah, and how are people supposed to believe in the real presence with the mass like that?
That's actually the idea, isn't it? I mean, a lot of the
it has to be
a lot of like what we know of like Soviet involvement in infiltrating the church is that they wanted to take people's eyes off of the Eucharist. They wanted people to stop believing in the real presence, because once you stop believing that is truly Jesus Christ fully present in the sacrament of the altar, what happens? You become open to all kinds of madness. Yeah. And so when you look at the polling data for how many Catholics believe in the real presence, and when it's a poll done in a way that explains to people what the real presence is, and you see that number is low to moderate to low, you should be concerned, because that is a major warning sign of the state of the church. Which is why my attitude is, yes, I'm a big believer in the Latin Mass. I fully am I take my family there exclusively. But if what you need to do first is get your head into the faith, and that doesn't mean go get a theology degree. It just means learn the faith in a way that is appropriate to your station in life. A college professor or a guy like me who's, trying to make a modest living talking about this stuff online has a bit different responsibility about how much we know about the faith than a person raising their family. But that doesn't mean, every Catholic should know the basics. You don't have to know. Yeah. You don't have to know complex, theories and arguments from Aquinas and other Catholic theologians and philosophers about, the real presence and Islam and Eastern Orthodox and everything else. But you do need to know enough of it. You need to know that your faith enough to be able to live it and to defend it in case, Joe Sixpack at the water cooler is trying to invite you to his life church thing on Sunday because it's such a wonderful concert where you get to flop around on the ground and feel the spirit.
Yeah,
that's the Protestant non-denominational franchise we have in my region is Life Church, and it's one of the if I make the mistake of if we go to the low mass, we might get back in time to be stuck in traffic behind the people leaving their late morning flopping around worship service, and I have disdain for that stuff because that isn't historic Christianity.
No,
that's just emotivism. And there's some people there with great faith, as I understand it, but that stuff is extremely dangerous. You listen to any exorcist, and that will tell you that the charismatic stuff is extremely dangerous. You should stay away from it.
Yeah, and I did a video on my channel called "Why Become or Stay Catholic," and the first reason is because we have the Eucharist. That is the whole central of our faith. We people want to talk about, at their church, they feel close to God, and you cannot on this earth become closer to God than we do when we receive Holy Communion. And that's something that the modernists cannot take away from us, so long as there are actual priests and whatnot.
Well, you should read what the original draft of the Novus Ordo had in it.
Oh my gosh.
I think it was Cardinal Ottaviani and a couple others had to do their intervention because the original draft from Bugnini and company had no canon of the Mass at all.
Oh yeah.
So when we talk about,
which goes back even before the New Testament documents, actually, to my understanding.
Yeah. So when we talk about what are the long-term plans of the modernists, it wouldn't shock me if, since the attacks on the Eucharist, like we see, the Eucharist in South America, if those attacks basically continue to unfold slowly, and 10 or 20 years from now, you had a more Anglican style statement of you can believe it's the real presence or not. And that, I don't think we'll get there, because at that point we'd be full of, what is it? Abomination of desolation in the church at that point. But
yeah. And I mean, you did make mention to me a few weeks ago about the prophecies of La Salette, and it, how does that fit into all this? And it's just like, wow, are we going to see all of this come to fruition, or is it going to be?
Some people think we already have seen all that stuff coming to fruition.
Yeah. It's.
I don't know. It depends on I never, like, if people ever ask me about timelines for chastisement, I don't give them one, because I'm not a prophet, and we're actually discouraged from doing that. I just say, well, if look at Fatima and look at our Lord's warnings about the kings of France, and you can kind of sort of suss out a timetable, that's probably still wrong. So the best thing you can do is become a prepper. And by a prepper, I mean get to confession, try to become a saint, grow closer to God, because all the prophecies of chastisement all sound like most people are going to die. So that's what you do first. And then if you want to worry about material prepping, well, there are lots of guides for how to do that. And good luck to you on it. Just take care of the important thing first.
Yeah, the most important thing is our souls and our family souls. That's what counts first and foremost.
And and I'm not dumping on any people who engage in traditional prepping at all.
Yeah,
I'm actually in awe of those guys, like the type of person who could just go drive their truck off into the tundra in Alaska and never come back, and then like 20 years later they come, they're still alive and thriving. I'm in awe of those guys, but it's not me.
No,
at least not at this stage.
No, I know that's not. I mean, maybe it should be me a little bit more, but I'm always been more involved in the thinking stuff and the theology stuff, and
yeah, I've been. I wasted my education on learning about politics and putting pieces together, and so I use those skills here. But I've got about 300 job applications out that tell me how useful my education is. Although a lot of them I've applied for, like nonprofits that would actually accept me, but there comes a section at the end of every job application that I already know is going to shoot me in the foot. So, and that's the identity checkbox one. So because of federal law on that stuff.
Oh
yeah. Oh well,
Yeah.
So what do you have coming on do you have a video topic ready for the coming week?
Well, I don't know. I might go a little bit more into the EU elections, but I think I'm going to probably just stick with the ongoing vegano stuff that's happening. But I've been also, I want to keep on this gay agenda stuff, and also possibly looking more into the Amazon Synod and maybe what we can look to be expecting from there. Also because they're, I think it was in 1832, I think it was Pius the Ninth. Might not be Pius the Ninth, but he warned then about a conspiracy against clerical celibacy. So I might put a video together on that, and to kind of prepare us for the Amazon Synod.
When you do that, may I recommend that you cover the arguments about people who I see this in the chat right now, that why is clerical celibacy such a big thing? It's just a discipline, yada yada yada. So I address that, because that is an argument that a lot of people are open to, especially since people, for some reason, entertain the idea that child sex abuse has to do with celibacy, which is a little like saying marriage cures rape. And I find the idea reprehensible. So,
and that's
I'm also not going to sit there and yell at people for having that opinion. Instead, I want to just try to work with them and show them why the church has clerical celibacy and why it should be defended.
Yeah, and it's an easy one to do just quickly. The reason the church has always had clerical celibacy for most of her history is because celibacy has always been viewed, as St. Paul himself said, a gift from God, that man cannot be celibate his entire life without an extreme outpouring of grace. And so the church has always wanted to pull her priests from that particular population of men who have been given this grace. And so, to completely decimate the idea of a celibate priesthood is going to begin pulling our ranks from people that do not have such obvious signs of grace. And of course, the idea that, the sex abuse is due in part or in whole or in any part because priests can't get married is kind of ridiculous, because all of us have been single for periods throughout our life. Some of us have been single for years.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never raped a child. I've never even had the thought to rape a child. And I'm sure that goes for all of us listening to this. So being single, being celibate, that's not the cause of child sex abuse or, pederasty. That's something completely different entirely.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, that's just the short version.
Okay, so is there anything else you wanted to cover before we call this?
I think that we pretty much nailed everything.
Very good. So we've been chatting with the Wandering Soul. I put a link to his channel in the pinned comments. So go ahead, and if you like what you heard from him, give him a subscribe. And I'll definitely do another live stream again soon that's open to the public. But yeah, let's take a chat. Let's take a look at the chat here to see if there was any kind of question for people. People are just having a good conversation about well, it looks like Malachi Martin, Art Bell, Father Ripperger, the need for, having beeswax candles for the 3 days of darkness, typical stuff,
Right.
I love it. I love our chat. Let's see. Here's one. Priestly abuse of children strictly caused by homosexual men in the priesthood. Milo and Jordan Peterson just admitted and normalized during an interview. Pedophilia is part of the gay life.
Yep.
And
I agree. I
agree. Whatever you may think, I am not exactly a fan of Jordan Peterson. I don't know why so many trads are. And I've got a lot of mixed feelings about Milo Yiannopoulos, but he never shied away from admitting fully that the so-called gay community has a big problem that they admit themselves with that whole subject of pederasty. And God bless him for being willing to be bluntly honest about it.
Yeah, it goes back to Greek and Roman times with them having young boys. It's absolutely part of that culture. So yeah, the person in the chat's 100% right on that.
Catholic Sharia next time. Some of us do joke about Catholic Sharia, but
should do a video on that.
I don't think you necessarily need that if you have
no.
Because when the triumph of the Immaculate Heart does come, it's going to be conversions on a mass scale. Of course, it'll be after the chastisement, so who knows how many people are going to be left walking around when that happens. But when it happens, you're going to have conversions on a mass scale, and if they are real conversions, which I have no reason to think they won't be, you won't need that kind of thing. You're not going to have utopia. People are still have hard times and things, but it'll be better, and there'll be modesty will be a thing again.
And I think that the whole Sharia meme comes from the obvious frustrations that people have with modern age women and their total lack of modesty, which is understandable. At the same time, we also kind of understand that we're living in a world where it just breeds that type of behavior.
And it's not just women either, man. I spend when I'm in good health, which God willing will be soon, since I'm getting a lot better now. I will return to being in the gym 1.5 to 2 hours a day, 4 to 5 days a week. And when you're around a bunch of guys who are lifting, you can tell when the immodesty kicks in, when they start staring at themselves in the mirror, looking at their rippling muscles. And that's really nauseating.
But I mean, we just one last point on that is women will become more modest in the future, just naturally, when men start expecting more of themselves, and then women will just automatically begin expecting more of themselves in turn. So that's stuff that will work itself out.
Create a bibliography page for my site. I do put sources for my videos already on the page. If you're meaning like a reading list or something, I could do that. I own a lot of books, so it would be one of these organic, I add to it as time goes on kind of things. If anybody has a suggestion for a book for my contest giveaway, go ahead and listen. If you don't know what I'm talking about, listen. In a few minutes, this will go live on the page. I said I made an announcement at the beginning. Let me know. It won't be a new book, and it won't be anything hyper expensive. So don't be like, hey, there's this book that's been out of print since 1913. You should give that away. I'm not going to go from a rare used book dealer and spend a couple $100 on a book just for redesigned picture to use on my channel. But I'm thinking of a copy of like The Four Last Things or Liberalism is a Sin or something or something like that. These are the kinds of books people should read, or maybe a book by Chad Ripperger. I have on my desk his book, The Binding Force of Tradition. That is a really solid book. So, so anyway, thanks for coming on, Damien. It was good to have you on, and thanks for listening, everybody.
Yep, thanks for having me.
Yep, we may do this again sometime. Just like I said, if you haven't subscribed to his channel, there's a link in the comments section. Go ahead and go check his channel out. He uploads a few times a week. How often do you upload now? I've noticed you're more active than you had been.
3 to 4 times a week.
Yeah, and they're in about half-an-hour videos or whatever. So
half an hour, 45 minutes. Yep.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks for joining us, everyone, and have a blessed weekend.